My brother texted me, "I inherited Grandma's jewelry," while I was still at her funeral, and I replied, "Did you read the last paragraph?" Because I was holding the actual will in my hand. He had found an old draft in Grandma's drawer and assumed it was the official document, posting photos of the jewelry on Facebook saying he'd finally have money for a new car. I stood in the cemetery, my phone vibrating with notifications as Brandon's post went viral among our relatives. The September rain had stopped, leaving everything smelling of wet earth and flowers. Around me, cousins and aunts whispered condolences, completely unaware that my brother was already dividing up our grandmother's possessions before her casket had even been lowered into the ground. My phone buzzed again. Another comment on Brandon's post. Someone wrote, "Finally getting what you deserve." My jaw clenched as I slipped the phone back into my black coat pocket, my fingers brushing against the envelope the attorney had handed me an hour before the service. Brandon hadn't even bothered to attend the funeral. He'd texted our mother saying he was too upset, that saying goodbye at the hospital 2 days ago had been enough. But I knew the truth. I'd seen him leaving Grandma Eleanor's house yesterday evening, his car trunk conspicuously full, a satisfied smirk on his face that made my stomach turn. Grandma Eleanor had raised us after our parents divorced when I was 7 and Brandon was 10. She'd been a gemologist, spending 40 years building a collection that museums had tried to purchase. Every piece had a story, a history, a meaning. The sapphire necklace from Burma that she'd acquired in 1978, the diamond bracelet that had belonged to a Russian countess, the emerald ring she'd worn on her wedding day. Brandon saw dollar signs. I saw our grandmother's legacy. The attorney, Thomas Wade, approached me as people began dispersing toward their cars. He was a thin man in his 60s, with silver hair and eyes that had seen too many family disputes over inheritances. "Miss Thornton," he said quietly, "I know this is difficult timing, but we need to discuss the will reading. It's scheduled for next Thursday at 2 o'clock. "I'll be there," I assured him, watching my mother help my father into their car across the cemetery lawn. They looked older suddenly, diminished by grief. Thomas hesitated, lowering his voice further. "Your grandmother made some very specific provisions. Very specific. She was quite insistent about the wording in the final month." His eyes held mine with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. "She mentioned she'd found an old draft missing from her files. She was concerned someone might find it and misunderstand." My phone buzzed again. Brandon had posted another photo, this time wearing Grandma's platinum watch, captioning it, "Already enjoying my inheritance." Grandma always knew I needed it more. The comments had shifted. Some relatives were congratulating him. Others were asking uncomfortable questions about whether the will had been read yet. I showed Thomas the post. His expression hardened. "That watch alone is valued at $85,000. It's a 1953 Patek Philippe." He pulled out his own phone, screenshotting Brandon's post. "This might be relevant to the proceedings." "The last paragraph," I said, remembering my text to Brandon. "What exactly does it say?" Thomas's slight smile was grim. "Come to the reading, Miss Thornton. Your grandmother was a very wise woman who understood human nature perhaps too well." He handed me his card. "If your brother posts anything else, document it. Screenshots, timestamps, witnesses to his statements, everything." As I walked to my car, my phone exploded with a call from Brandon. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call. And another. Finally, a text. "What do you mean about the last paragraph? This is the will. I found it in her desk. Stop trying to cause problems." I responded simply, "See you Thursday at the attorney's office? 2 o'clock. Don't be late." His reply was instant. "I'm not going to some lawyer meeting. The will is clear. Everything's mine. Mom and Dad agree." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Of course our parents agreed. They'd always favored Brandon, always made excuses for his behavior, always blamed me for not being more understanding of his struggles. When he'd stolen money from Grandma's purse 3 years ago, they'd called it borrowing. When he'd forged her signature on a check, they'd said he was desperate and we should help family. But Grandma Eleanor had seen through him. In her final weeks, when I'd visited her every day after my nursing shifts, she'd held my hand with surprising strength and whispered, "I've taken care of everything, Rebecca. He won't destroy what I've built. Trust me." I'd found her special instructions tucked into the real will. Instructions that made my breath catch. Instructions that would change everything. My phone rang again. This time it was my mother. I answered, hearing her voice tight with disapproval. "Rebecca, your brother says you're claiming his inheritance isn't valid. How could you be so cruel at a time like this? Your grandmother loved Brandon. She always gave him extra help because he needed it more. Mom, There's a will reading on Thursday. We should all wait until then to discuss this. We don't need a will reading. Brandon found the will. It's very clear. You're just jealous because she left you her books and he got the valuable things. Her words cut, not because they were true, but because they revealed how little my own mother understood about fairness or truth. I'll see you Thursday, I said, ending the call before she could continue. That night, I sat in my small apartment and reviewed everything Thomas had given me. The real will was dated 3 weeks before Grandma's death. The draft Brandon had found was from 18 months ago, before she'd discovered his gambling debts, before she'd learned he'd tried to sell one of her rings without permission, before she'd realized the extent of his selfishness. The final paragraph read, "In the event that any beneficiary demonstrates through their actions a mercenary or disrespectful attitude toward this inheritance prior to the official reading of this will, including but not limited to premature claiming of assets, public boasting about inheritances not yet legally transferred, or removing items from my residence without proper authorization, said beneficiary shall be considered to have violated the terms of this bequest and shall forfeit all rights to any portion of my estate." Brandon had violated every single condition, and he documented it all on social media for the world to see. I opened my laptop and began saving every post, every comment, every photograph. Brandon had uploaded 17 images of himself with Grandma's jewelry, each one time-stamped before the funeral had even ended. He'd listed several pieces on an online auction site. He'd texted multiple people about his plans to sell everything and pay off his debts, buy a new truck, maybe take his girlfriend to Hawaii. He'd handed me everything I needed on a silver platter. Thursday arrived with unseasonably cold weather for late September. I dressed carefully in a navy suit, professional and composed, the kind of outfit Grandma Eleanor would have approved of. The law office of Wade and Associates occupied the 3rd floor of a historic building in downtown Portland, all dark wood paneling and leather chairs that smelled of old money and older secrets. I arrived 15 minutes early. Thomas Wade's assistant offered me coffee in a porcelain cup, not the paper kind, and led me to a conference room with windows overlooking the Willamette River. The actual will sat on the table in a blue folder, official and untouchable. Brandon arrived 12 minutes late, wearing jeans and a wrinkled button-down shirt, my mother clutching his arm like he was the grieving victim in all of this. My father trailed behind them, looking uncomfortable in a suit he'd probably last worn to Grandma's funeral. Brandon's girlfriend Kayla came too, uninvited, chewing gum and scrolling through her phone. "This is ridiculous," Brandon announced as he dropped into a chair across from me. "We already know what the will says. I showed it to Mom and Dad. Rebecca's just being difficult because she didn't get the jewelry." Thomas Wade entered, carrying a thick file and wearing an expression of professional neutrality that didn't quite hide his distaste. "Thank you all for coming. I'm Thomas Wade, and I had the privilege of serving as Eleanor Thornton's attorney for the past 19 years. He settled into his chair, adjusting his glasses. "Before we begin the formal reading, I need to address some irregularities that have come to my attention." Brandon shifted impatiently. "What irregularities? The will is straightforward." Thomas opened his file, pulling out printed screenshots of Brandon's Facebook posts. "These irregularities, Mr. Thornton. I have here documented evidence that you entered your grandmother's residence, removed valuable property, and publicly claimed ownership of assets from an estate that had not yet been settled or distributed." My mother gasped. "Those are private posts. How dare you invade his privacy? Mrs. Thornton, your son posted these publicly on a social media platform where they were viewed by over 300 people, including several witnesses I've already interviewed." Thomas laid out the screenshots one by one, a damning timeline of greed. He also listed several items for sale on online auction sites while his grandmother's body was literally being buried. Brandon's face flushed red. "I found her will. It said everything was mine. I was just taking what she wanted me to have. That's the issue we need to address," Thomas said, pulling out 2 documents. "What you found, Mr. Thornton, was a draft. An outdated draft that your grandmother had specifically asked me about 6 weeks before her death. She was concerned it had gone missing from her files." The room went silent except for the hum of the heating system. Thomas continued, "The actual will, the legal document that represents Eleanor Thornton's final wishes, was executed 23 days before her death in my office, witnessed by 2 notaries and my paralegal. It supersedes any previous drafts or versions." He slid the official will toward the center of the table. Brandon lunged forward, grabbing it. His eyes scanned the pages frantically, his face draining of color as he reached the 2nd page, then the 3rd, then the final paragraph. "This can't be legal," he whispered. "She wouldn't. She always took care of me. She knew I needed help." I watched him, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction as he realized what he'd done to himself. My father leaned over to read, his brow furrowing. I don't understand. What does this mean? The estate is divided equally. But then this last part about forfeiture. Thomas folded his hands. Eleanor Thornton's will originally did divide the estate between her two grandchildren. However, she included a very specific clause that would activate if either beneficiary demonstrated what she termed mercenary behavior before the official distribution of assets. He looked directly at Brandon. She defined such behavior as removing items without authorization, publicly claiming inheritances before legal transfer, attempting to sell estate property, or displaying disrespect for the process of estate settlement. Brandon slammed his fist on the table. She was confused. Old people get confused. This isn't fair. Your grandmother was examined by 2 physicians in the week before signing this will, Thomas said, his voice sharp. Both certified her as being of completely sound mind. In fact, she specifically anticipated this reaction, which is why she insisted on such thorough documentation. He pulled out another file. I also have her handwritten notes explaining her reasoning, dated and witnessed. My mother was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. Rebecca, you knew about this. You knew and you let him post those things. You set him up. I texted him, I said quietly, and asked if he'd read the last paragraph. He chose not to. He chose to ignore it and continue posting, continue selling, continue celebrating his inheritance before it was legally his. I met Brandon's eyes. I gave you a chance to stop. You didn't take it. Kayla, Brandon's girlfriend, stood abruptly. This is bullshit. We already spent some of that money. We put down a deposit on a new truck based on what we'd get from selling that jewelry. The silence that followed was profound. Thomas made a note. So, you've already attempted to sell estate property and used anticipated proceeds for purchases. That's called conversion, and it's illegal. Brandon's hands were shaking. The jewelry's already been appraised. I have buyers lined up. You can't just take it away from me. The jewelry was never yours to appraise or sell, Thomas stated. You removed it illegally from your grandmother's home. As of this moment, that constitutes theft. I've already filed a police report on behalf of the estate, and I have a court order for you to return every single item you removed within 24 hours. My father finally spoke, his voice heavy. Brandon, what have you done? What I had to do, Brandon shouted, standing so fast his chair toppled backward. You all act like I'm some kind of criminal. Grandma always helped me when I needed it. Always. She understood that Rebecca has her perfect little nursing job and doesn't need help, but I'm drowning in debt. That jewelry was my way out. That jewelry, I said, my voice cutting through his rant, was Grandma's life's work. Every piece had meaning to her. She told me stories about each one. The sapphire necklace she bought when she traveled to Burma in 1978, the emerald ring Grandpa gave her on their wedding day, the diamond bracelet that survived the Holocaust with its original owner. I stood, facing him across the table. You didn't see any of that. You saw dollar signs and a new truck. Brandon's laugh was bitter. Of course you'd make this about sentimental garbage. You always were her favorite after you started kissing up to her, visiting every day, pretending to care. I did care, I said. That's the difference between us. Thomas cleared his throat. If we could return to the legal matters. Mr. Thornton, you have 24 hours to return all items removed from your grandmother's residence. Failure to comply will result in criminal theft charges. Additionally, because you violated the terms of the will's forfeiture clause, you are entitled to nothing from Eleanor Thornton's estate. And the estate goes too, my father asked quietly. Thomas looked at me. The entire estate, including the jewelry collection valued at $340,000, the house and property valued at $475,000, all financial accounts totaling $192,000, and all personal effects goes to Rebecca Ann Thornton. The number hit me like a physical force, over $1 million. Grandma had been wealthier than any of us had known. My mother's sob broke the silence. You're destroying this family over money, your own brother. No, I said, my voice steady. Brandon destroyed his inheritance over greed. I'm just the one holding Grandma's real will. The next 24 hours were a masterclass in watching someone unravel. Brandon initially refused to return anything, barricading himself in the apartment he shared with Kayla and posting increasingly unhinged rants on social media about how I'd manipulated a senile old woman and stolen his inheritance. Thomas Wade filed the criminal complaint at 9:00 a.m. Friday morning. By noon, 2 police officers appeared at Brandon's door with a warrant. I wasn't there, but Kayla's sister streamed the whole encounter on Instagram Live. apparently thinking it would help their case by showing police harassment. Instead, it showed Brandon screaming obscenities while officers calmly inventoried items scattered throughout the apartment. Grandma's sapphire necklace was in Kayla's jewelry box. The platinum watch was on Brandon's wrist. The emerald ring was in a pawn shop receipt folder, already sold for a fraction of its value. When officers found that receipt, Brandon's situation shifted from civil forfeiture to criminal theft and fencing stolen property. I watched the stream from my apartment, my nursing scrubs still on from my shift, and felt absolutely nothing but satisfaction. My phone rang constantly. Relatives who'd commented congratulations on Brandon's original posts now called demanding to know why I was pressing charges against family. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly had opinions about forgiveness and Christian charity. I blocked them all. Saturday morning, Thomas called with an update. The pawnshop owner confirmed Brandon sold the emerald ring for $12,000. Its actual value is $68,000. The buyer was a private collector who's now threatening his own lawsuit. There was a pause. Your brother's also facing fraud charges because he forged documents claiming ownership. Good, I said. Rebecca, Thomas's tone shifted, becoming almost paternal. I need you to understand what's happening here. Your grandmother planned this. Every detail. She knew Brandon would do exactly what he did, and she structured the will to catch him. I'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a chill through me. She told me she'd taken care of everything. She did more than that. Papers rustled on his end. 3 months before she died, she hired a private investigator to document Brandon's activities. She knew about his gambling debts, the forged check from 2 years ago that your parents covered up, the merchandise he'd stolen from his employer and sold online. She compiled a complete file. My grandmother, the quiet woman who'd taught me to bake cookies and identify gemstones, had been conducting a covert investigation of her own grandson. Why didn't she just disinherit him outright? I asked. Because she wanted him to do it to himself, Thomas replied. She said, and I quote, "If Brandon has truly changed, if he's learned anything from his mistakes, he'll wait for the proper reading and follow procedures. If he hasn't, he'll reveal his true nature, and the consequences will be his own fault." She was testing him. Brandon had failed spectacularly. By Sunday, my parents' position had shifted from defending Brandon to begging me to drop the charges and split the inheritance anyway. My father showed up at my apartment at 7 in the morning looking like he hadn't slept. "Your brother made mistakes," he said, standing in my doorway because I didn't invite him in. "But he's family. Your mother and I will pay back whatever he sold. We'll take out a loan if we have to. Just please don't send him to prison." "He sent himself to prison," I replied. "I didn't force him to break into Grandma's house. I didn't make him post on social media. I didn't forge ownership documents to pawn her jewelry." "You baited him!" My father's composure cracked. "You knew about that clause and you let him hang himself. What kind of person does that to their own brother? The kind of person who's watched him steal, lie, and manipulate for 32 years while everyone made excuses." I felt my own anger rising. The kind of person who sat with Grandma every single day while she was dying, while Brandon couldn't be bothered to visit unless he needed money. The kind of person who actually loved her instead of seeing her as a bank account. My father flinched. She was my mother. I loved her. Then why did you let Brandon treat her like an ATM? Why did you cover for him when he stole from her? Why did you always take his side? The questions I'd buried for years poured out. Even now, you're here defending him instead of acknowledging what he did was wrong. "Because he's my son, and he's struggling," my father shouted. "Because not everyone is as perfect as you, Rebecca. Some people need more help, more patience, more understanding, and some people need consequences," I said quietly, which is exactly what Grandma understood. He left without another word. Monday brought the preliminary hearing. Brandon appeared in court wearing an ill-fitting suit, his public defender looking exhausted before proceedings even began. The prosecutor presented the Instagram live stream, the Facebook posts, the pawnshop receipts, and testimony from the officers who'd served the warrant. Brandon's defense was that he genuinely believed the draft was the real will, and therefore had a good faith claim to the property. The prosecutor destroyed that argument in 3 sentences, pointing out that even if he'd believed the will was real, it still hadn't been through probate, and he still had no legal right to remove property from the estate. The judge set bail at $50,000. Brandon didn't have $50, let alone $50,000. My parents mortgaged their house to bail him out, a fact my mother made sure I knew through a scathing text message about family loyalty and how I'd destroyed their retirement security. I slept better that night than I had in months. The estate processing took 6 weeks. During that time, I hired my own attorney, a woman named Patricia Chen, who specialized in estate law and had a reputation for being ruthlessly thorough. She ensured every item Brandon had removed was cataloged, photographed, and assessed for damage. The emerald ring he'd pawned was recovered, but the pawn shop owner demanded reimbursement for what he'd paid Brandon. The platinum watch had a scratch on its crystal from where Brandon had worn it while working on his car. The sapphire necklace was intact, but its original presentation box was missing, reducing its collectible value. Patricia documented everything, building a case for additional civil damages on top of the criminal charges. Meanwhile, Grandma's house waited. I visited it alone on a Wednesday afternoon, using the key Thomas had given me. The place smelled stale, like grief and abandonment. Brandon had ransacked the bedroom where Grandma kept her collection, leaving drawers open and boxes overturned in his frantic search for valuables. But he'd missed things. He'd missed the false bottom in her jewelry armoire where she kept her most precious pieces, the ones with purely sentimental value. He'd missed the photo albums documenting her life, the handwritten journals she'd kept for 50 years, the letters Grandpa had sent her during the Korean War. He'd missed everything that actually mattered. I found her notes tucked inside her favorite book, a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. Her handwriting was shaky but clear. Rebecca will understand why I did this. She knows that love without respect is worthless, and Brandon stopped respecting me years ago. I hope this teaches him something, though I doubt it will. Some people never learn. I sat in her reading chair and cried for the first time since her death. Not from sadness, but from gratitude that she'd seen me, truly seen me, and trusted me with her legacy. The trial was set for January, but Brandon's attorney pushed for a plea deal in mid-November. The evidence was overwhelming, and taking it to trial would only increase his prison time. The prosecutor offered a deal. Brandon would plead guilty to felony theft and fraud, serve 18 months in county jail, and pay full restitution for all damages to the estate. Patricia advised me to reject it. "We can push for more," she said during a conference call. "His actions weren't just theft. They showed premeditation and a pattern of behavior. We have leverage." I thought about Grandma's notes, about her hope that this might teach Brandon something. "Counteroffer," I told Patricia. 3 years in prison, full restitution including the diminished value of damaged items, and a recorded apology to be submitted to the court acknowledging exactly what he did and why it was wrong. Patricia smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "I'll draft it." Brandon's attorney called me directly 2 days later, violating protocol and earning himself a reprimand from Patricia. "You're destroying a man's life over jewelry," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "He has a daughter. Did you know that? Kayla's pregnant. You're taking a father away from his child." "He took himself away," I replied, my voice cold. "And if Kayla's pregnant, she should know what kind of man is fathering her child, someone who steals from dying relatives and shows zero remorse. The plea offer on the table is fair. My counteroffer is fair. He committed crimes. He pays consequences. That's how the justice system works. You're vindictive." "I'm thorough," I corrected. "There's a difference." The call ended badly. Thanksgiving arrived like a funeral. My parents invited me to dinner out of obligation, making it clear Brandon would be there, and I was expected to make peace for the sake of family. I declined. Instead, I had dinner with 3 colleagues from the hospital, women who understood complicated family dynamics and didn't judge me for choosing myself over dysfunction. Brandon spent Thanksgiving posting on Facebook about forgiveness and second chances, tagging me in passive-aggressive memes about people who valued money over family. I documented every post for Patricia, who was building a case that his continued social media behavior demonstrated lack of remorse and justified harsher sentencing. The week after Thanksgiving, Brandon finally cracked. He showed up at the hospital where I worked, somehow making it past security to the ICU where I was finishing a shift. He looked terrible, gaunt, and hollow-eyed, his clothes hanging off a frame that had lost at least 20 pounds. "Rebecca, please," he said, his voice breaking. "I'll do whatever you want. I'll sign anything. I'll apologize. Just don't send me to prison. Kayla's leaving me. Mom and Dad can't afford the mortgage payment because of my bail. I've lost everything." Nurses and patients were watching, I kept my voice professional and calm. You need to leave. You're not supposed to contact me. I'm your brother. His voice rose, desperate and angry. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Security appeared, two large men moving efficiently to flank Brandon. He didn't resist as they escorted him out, but his final words echoed down the hallway. Grandma would be ashamed of you. My supervisor, a woman named Helen who'd worked in nursing for 30 years, touched my shoulder gently. You okay? I'm fine, I said, and meant it. For what it's worth, Helen said quietly. I had a brother like that. Took me too long to cut him off. You're doing the right thing. That evening, Brandon's attorney called Patricia with a new counteroffer. Brandon would accept the 3 years, accept the restitution, but refused the recorded apology. He says he has nothing to apologize for, since he believed he had a right to the property. Patricia's laugh was sharp. Then we go to trial, and I'll make sure the jury hears every single detail of his pattern of theft and manipulation. The prosecutors already agreed to add elder abuse charges based on the evidence Mrs. Thornton's investigator compiled. That's an additional 5 years minimum. Silence on the other end. You have 48 hours, Patricia said. After that, the offer expires and we proceed to trial. Brandon signed the plea agreement on December 3rd. The recorded apology was delivered to the court on December 5th, and Patricia sent me a copy of the video file. I watched it alone in my apartment, a glass of Grandma's favorite wine in my hand. Brandon sat in a gray room, his attorney beside him, looking into the camera with dead eyes. I, Brandon James Thornton, plead guilty to felony theft and fraud in the matter of the Eleanor Thornton estate. His voice was flat, emotionless. I illegally removed property from my grandmother's residence after her death. I attempted to sell estate property without legal authorization. I forged documents claiming ownership of items that were not mine. He paused, his jaw working. I did these things knowing they were wrong. I did them because I was selfish, and I prioritized my financial problems over respecting my grandmother's wishes and the legal process. I caused harm to the estate and to my sister Rebecca, who was the rightful executor and beneficiary. Another pause, longer this time. I apologized to the court and to Rebecca for my actions. I accept full responsibility for the consequences. The video ended. It wasn't remorse. It was defeat, but it was enough. Brandon's sentencing hearing took place on a frozen January morning. The courtroom was nearly empty, just the necessary officials, my parents sitting stone-faced in the gallery, and me with Patricia beside me. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Margaret Reeves, with silver hair and eyes that had seen every variation of human weakness. She reviewed the case file in silence before looking up at Brandon, who stood beside his public defender, looking small and defeated. Mr. Thornton, Judge Reeves began, her voice carrying the weight of authority earned through decades on the bench. I've reviewed your case extensively, including the recorded apology, the evidence of your crimes, and the impact statements. I've also reviewed the investigative file compiled by your late grandmother regarding your pattern of behavior over the past several years. Brandon's head snapped up. What file? The file documenting your theft of merchandise from 3 previous employers, your gambling debts totaling $63,000, your fraudulent use of your grandmother's credit card on 2 occasions, and your attempts to manipulate her into giving you money by fabricating medical emergencies. Judge Reeves's expression was granite. Your grandmother was a meticulous woman who understood exactly who you were. My mother made a choked sound from the gallery. The judge continued. What disturbs me most about this case is not just the theft itself, but your complete lack of genuine remorse. Your apology was coerced as part of a plea agreement. Your social media posts show you still believe yourself to be a victim. You've learned nothing. Brandon's attorney stood. Your Honor, my client has accepted responsibility. Your client accepted a plea deal to avoid harsher consequences. Judge Reeves interrupted. That's not the same as accepting responsibility. True responsibility involves understanding the harm you've caused and demonstrating genuine change. She looked back at Brandon. Have you changed, Mr. Thornton? Brandon opened his mouth, closed it, then finally said, I'm trying to. That's not an answer. Judge Reeves picked up another document. I have here a motion from the prosecution to enhance your sentence based on the elder abuse statutes. Typically, these are reserved for caretakers who harm vulnerable adults, but the prosecution argues that your pattern of financial exploitation of your grandmother while she was ill qualifies. Brandon went pale. I never hurt her. I never touched her. You stole from her while she was dying, I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. Judge Reeves looked at me, not with disapproval for the outburst, but with something like understanding. Miss Thornton, would you like to make a victim impact statement? I hadn't planned to speak, but I stood anyway. Patricia nodded encouragement. My grandmother spent 40 years building a legacy, I said, my voice steady and clear. Every piece in her collection had meaning, had history, had a story. She traveled the world, she studied, she learned, she created something beautiful. I looked at Brandon, seeing him truly for what he was, pathetic, small, and utterly selfish. You saw all of that and thought only about what you could get for it. You didn't ask about the stories. You didn't care about the history. You just calculated dollars. Brandon wouldn't meet my eyes. She gave you chances, I continued. So many chances. She paid your debts. She bailed you out. She forgave you over and over. And the moment she died, before she was even buried, you were posting pictures of yourself wearing her jewelry and planning which pieces to sell first. My voice hardened. You don't deserve forgiveness. You don't deserve leniency. You deserve exactly what you're getting. I sat down, my hands shaking slightly. Patricia squeezed my arm. Judge Reeves was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke. Brandon James Thornton, I hereby sentence you to 4 years in the Oregon State Correctional Institution, not the county jail offered in your plea agreement. You will also pay full restitution to the estate in the amount of $87,400, covering the diminished value of items you damaged, the legal fees incurred by the estate, and the costs of recovering pawned property. Brandon's knees buckled. His attorney caught him. Furthermore, the judge continued, you are prohibited from contacting Rebecca Thornton or any member of the Thornton family who does not explicitly consent to contact. You will surrender all social media passwords to your probation officer, and any posts about this case or the Thornton family will be considered a violation of your sentence terms. My mother was sobbing now. My father sat frozen, his face gray. Additionally, I'm ordering a forensic analysis of your finances to ensure full restitution is paid. If you're found to have hidden assets or income, your sentence will be extended. Judge Reeves looked at Brandon with something close to contempt. Your grandmother gave you every advantage, every opportunity to be better. You chose greed. Now you'll have 4 years to think about that choice. The bailiff moved forward to take Brandon into custody. As they led him away, he finally looked at me, and I saw in his eyes, the moment he truly understood he'd destroyed himself. I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Outside the courtroom, my mother confronted me, her face blotchy with tears. Are you happy now? Your brother is going to prison. You've destroyed this family. Brandon destroyed himself, I replied calmly. I just held him accountable. You could have split the inheritance, she spat. You could have been generous, like Eleanor would have wanted. Grandma wanted exactly this, I said. She planned it. She knew what he was, and she made sure he couldn't profit from her death. I looked at both my parents, these people who'd enabled Brandon's behavior for decades. You should be ashamed, not of what I did, but of what you allowed him to become. My father finally spoke, his voice hollow. We needed that bail money for our retirement. Then you shouldn't have bailed out a thief, I said simply, and walked away. Patricia caught up with me at my car. The estate should be fully settled within the next 2 weeks, she said. The house, the jewelry, the accounts, all legally transferred to you. Brandon's restitution will be paid through a garnishment of his prison wages, which means you'll get about $15 a month for the next several decades. But it's the principle. I laughed, a genuine sound that surprised me. Thank you, Patricia, for everything. Thank your grandmother, she replied. She's the one who set this all up. I just executed her plan. She paused. Off the record, I've handled a lot of estates. Eleanor Thornton was one of the smartest clients I never actually met. She knew exactly what she was doing. That night, I returned to Grandma's house, soon to be legally mine. I walked through the rooms slowly, seeing them not as spaces to be sold or profited from, but as a legacy to be honored. Her jewelry collection would go to museums as she'd wanted, with specific pieces kept for sentimental value. The house would become a rental property, providing steady income. The financial accounts would be invested wisely. And Brandon would serve his 4 years, emerge with a felony record and destroyed reputation, and spend the rest of his life knowing he'd thrown away a fortune because he couldn't wait 1 week to be greedy. Grandma Eleanor had taught me many things: how to identify a quality gemstone, how to bake the perfect pie crust, how to be patient and thorough. But her final lesson was the most valuable. Sometimes the best revenge is simply stepping back and letting people destroy themselves, then watching the consequences unfold exactly as planned. 8 months after Brandon's sentencing, I stood in the gallery of the Pacific Museum of Natural History, watching as they unveiled the Eleanor Thornton collection of historical gemstones. The sapphire necklace from Burma held place of honor in a climate-controlled case, its deep blue facets catching light like captured ocean. Next to it, the diamond bracelet sparkled behind bulletproof glass, its provenance card explaining its journey from Russian aristocracy through the Holocaust to a gemologist's careful hands in Portland. The museum director, a scholarly woman named Dr. Patricia Vance, gave a speech about Grandma's contributions to gemology and her generous donation of the collection for public education and appreciation. My name was mentioned as the executor of the estate who'd honored Eleanor's wishes. Brandon's name was never spoken, erased from this legacy as completely as he'd tried to erase its meaning. I kept only 3 pieces: the emerald ring from Grandma's wedding day, the simple gold locket containing photos of her and Grandpa, and a small jade pendant she'd worn daily for as long as I could remember. Everything else went where it belonged, where people could learn from it and appreciate it properly. The house sold 2 months ago to a young family with 3 children. I'd insisted on meeting them before accepting their offer, wanting to ensure the place would be filled with love again. The mother had tears in her eyes when she walked through Grandma's garden, saying it reminded her of her own grandmother's roses. I gave them the sale price $20,000 below market value. Brandon is currently serving month 9 of his 48-month sentence at the Oregon State Correctional Institution. According to the restitution tracking system, he's paid $135 toward his $87,000 debt through his prison job in the laundry facility. At this rate, he'll finish paying it off sometime around his 84th birthday. Kayla left him before he'd even spent a month in prison, moving back to California with her family. The baby she'd claimed to be pregnant with either never existed or was quietly terminated. I don't know which. And I don't care. My parents haven't spoken to me since the sentencing. They lost their house to foreclosure 6 months ago when they couldn't maintain the mortgage payments they'd taken out for Brandon's bail. Last I heard, they'd moved into a small rental apartment across town, and my father had come out of retirement to work as a cashier at a hardware store. My mother sends occasional emails with subject lines like, "I hope you're happy," and "Blood is thicker than water," which I delete without reading. The police officer who'd arrested Brandon told me during a chance encounter at a coffee shop that my brother had become something of a cautionary tale at the prison. Apparently, the other inmates found it hilarious that he'd gone to prison for being too greedy to wait 1 week. They call him the impatient heir, the officer said with a grin. Nobody respects a guy who couldn't even wait for Grandma to get cold before robbing her. I've invested most of the inheritance conservatively, using the income to supplement my nursing salary and donate to causes Grandma supported, gemology education, women's shelters, and literacy programs. I still work full-time at the hospital because I love my job and because I refuse to be the kind of person who lives off inherited wealth without contributing something of value to the world. Last week, I received a letter from Brandon. The prison had forwarded it to Patricia, who'd forwarded it to me with a note. "You're not required to read this, but I wanted you to have the option." I almost threw it away unopened. Instead, I made myself a cup of Grandma's favorite tea and read it in her old reading chair. The letter was 3 pages of small, cramped handwriting. It started with excuses about how prison was harder than he'd expected, how he'd made mistakes but didn't deserve this level of punishment, how I'd betrayed him by not splitting the inheritance like a good sister should have. Then it shifted to begging. He needed money for the commissary. He needed books. He needed me to help him appeal his sentence. He needed me to talk to the parole board about early release. He needed. The final paragraph was the only acknowledgement of actual wrongdoing. I know I shouldn't have taken the jewelry before the will was read. I see that now. I was stressed about money and I made a bad choice. But you didn't have to destroy my whole life over one mistake. Families are supposed to forgive each other. That's what Grandma would have wanted. I read it twice, then fed it into my paper shredder and threw the confetti into the recycling bin. Brandon still didn't understand. After everything, he still saw himself as the victim and me as the villain. He still believed it was one mistake rather than a lifetime pattern of selfishness and theft. He still thought forgiveness was something he was entitled to rather than something he needed to earn. Some people never learn. Yesterday, I visited Grandma's grave for the first time since the museum opening. I brought fresh flowers, her favorite yellow roses, and sat on the bench nearby. You were right, I said aloud to the granite headstone. About everything. About him. About the will. About what would happen. The spring breeze carried the scent of roses and fresh-cut grass. He's exactly where he deserves to be, and I'm exactly where you wanted me to be. Thank you for trusting me with this. Thank you for seeing me. A monarch butterfly landed on the headstone for just a moment before flying away, and I chose to take it as a sign of approval. I returned to my car where my entire life waited. My career helping people heal, my investments providing security, Grandma's legacy preserved for the world, and the profound satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served, not through my actions, but through allowing Brandon's own greed to consume him. He'd wanted Grandma's jewelry so badly he couldn't wait 7 days. Those 7 days had cost him 4 years of freedom, his reputation, his family, his future, and any chance at redemption. Meanwhile, I had everything that truly mattered: self-respect, financial security, meaningful work, and the knowledge that I'd honored the woman who'd raised me by refusing to enable the man who'd exploited her. Brandon had taught me an important lesson, though not the one he'd intended. The best revenge isn't something you do to someone else. It's stepping back, protecting yourself, and watching them face the natural consequences of their own terrible choices. Grandma Eleanor had understood that perfectly. She'd set the trap, included the warning, and given Brandon every opportunity to prove he'd changed. He'd failed the test spectacularly, and I'd passed by simply refusing to save him from himself.